All right, we're on. Rich, you're on.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for this. And thanks to everybody who is on the call here. And look, I'm the setup for Brian. Brian is a pledged brother of mine, and he is the real entrepreneur, right? I'm a paper pushing academic administrator. That's what I am. And I'm here to talk about sort of what's going on mostly on campus, because that, as some of you know, that's the role that I've been playing on campus. So I thought I would just set this up with a few comments about what is going on campus. Some of you have, those of you that are current students or recent students, you will have seen some of this stuff, but I thought I'd give you a bird's eye view of how this so-called ecosystem on the Berkeley campus is evolving, and then just talk about a few of the concrete suggestions I would have. But I think in the Q&A we'll have a lot more to discuss, so I look forward to that. So my title, it's a mouthful. It's a brand new title for me. Actually, it's a new role for the campus. This role didn't exist before January of this year. Chief Innovation and Entrepreneurship Officer. People ask me, well, what is that? And in fact, we're defining it as we go along. But two quick elements that do report directly into me. One is Skydeck. For those of you that have been close to campus, you've heard of Skydeck, certainly. There's several accelerators, these startup team accelerators on campus. The biggest one, the central one, is called Skydeck. It's actually in downtown Berkeley, the building that we used to call the Power Bar building way back when. It's right outside the downtown Berkeley BART station there, the 13th floor building. And Skydeck is right up at the top level. It's a gorgeous space. In any event, it is an accelerator, and they bring in a new set of teams every 6 months. They select about 25 teams in each of the application rounds. And this last application round, they got 1,600 applications to pick 25. So these are 25 extraordinary teams. Anyways, that's part of what I oversee. And then the second big part of what I oversee on campus is what some people call technology transfer. So patenting and the licensing and the intellectual property, IP management, that sort of stuff. That's not an area where I have a lot of technical expertise. My field is finance and economics. So when it comes down to whether the campus should take a warrant in a licensing deal, a warrant being a long-dated option on a startup's equity value, that's the sort of thing I know how to deal with. But when it comes to exactly how do you license technology coming out of our life science labs, that is not my expertise, naturally. Anyways, so that's my role on campus. I've been doing it, as I said, for just 6 months. What I thought I would start with is a few slides and then a few recommendations, and I'll turn it over to Brian and we can do Q&A. So Matt, if you would advance the slide, I think people can see that slide. So in the year 2000, what did the Berkeley so-called ecosystem or innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem look like? And this is our best representation of it. I can make these slides available to anybody who would like them. They were actually produced fairly recently. And if you said, well, what is this ecosystem thing? Well, what are the verticals, or here are the rows? What are the categories of things that make up a university ecosystem like this? What kind of academic programs do you have? What's the funding support? Which venture capitalists are dedicated to the campus? Here, for example, funding support, there's nothing in that row. There were lots of venture capital firms that were investing in UC Berkeley companies, but there weren't any that were like dedicated, focused on Berkeley, saying we fund Berkeley companies. It's our focus. We didn't have any of those that were dedicated like that. Legal support, etc. Student organizations, not a lot going on. Up at the top level there, the top row, the Lester Center for Entrepreneurship, that was the entrepreneurship unit within the business school, what we now call the Haas School, for those of you that were at Berkeley before the early 1990s. And engineering had a few things going on. So let's flip it to the next slide. So 5 years later, there's some more entries into this. I'll go more quickly in the slides, but things are starting to build out. And you start to see some things that weren't there before. I won't walk you through all of these things, but these are important changes in what's going on. The startup support, these business plan competitions, global social venture competition, these are some of the things that developed. B Partners, you see the first dedicated venture capital company that's focused on Berkeley. 2010, next slide, please, Matt. Now it starts getting kind of crowded. I won't go through all of this, but for example, that third line, if you see this, it's called Innovation Core. The National Science Foundation created It's basically innovation and entrepreneurship training for our faculty members. So these are the research faculty, and the idea is not that, you know, these lab scientists that are coming up with CRISPR and these other remarkable technologies, they aren't necessarily, some of them do, but they aren't necessarily becoming entrepreneurs themselves. But we wanted them to be able to see what was going on downstream. In the words of the National Science Foundation, our scientists in this country are very good at converting money into ideas, but not as good as at turning ideas into money. And the idea was simply that we have to get better as a nation to make sure that those ideas are getting into society, getting into the marketplace. And that's part of what that program was about. That's obviously a national level program, but Berkeley was one of the main nodes in that national network. Anyways, next slide, 2015. Tons of stuff on there. I'm just, you know, look at funding support. Now we've got a number of funds that are starting to develop. I'll mention that very last one in funding support, Berkeley Catalyst Fund. This came out of the College of Chemistry. This is a fascinating idea. So this is a venture capital fund where half of the general partner, the so-called GP, half of the carry, half of the return that goes to the general partner is pledged to Berkeley. It's a hardwired pipe back to Berkeley's budget. So this is interesting. So we call these shared carry funds, and we now have 3 shared carry venture capital funds at Berkeley. So these are funds where it's not somebody saying, hey, I plan to give a gift and so forth. No. It's like the money gets realized and it goes directly into a Berkeley account. And, you know, anyways, I won't say too much more about it, but we have a lot of venture capital activity at Berkeley, and some of it is in this rapidly growing subcategory called shared carry funds. That's really an exciting way for Berkeley financially to participate in this nonlinear wealth creation that Berkeley's always been part of. But if you want Berkeley to stay strong, it's really got to participate in that nonlinearity going forward more than it has in the past. Last slide, please, Matt. So now, you know, some people look at this and, well, I'll speak for myself. I looked at these slides the first time I saw them and said, hallelujah, it is just awesome how much delta there's been just in the last 20 years. But some people look at these slides and say, wow, it looks really fragmented. What the hell is going on? Why don't you guys coordinate something, please? And that's sort of my role on Canvas is how do we add, so one way to think about all those little logos on that slide is that Berkeley so often has evolved as 1,000 flowers bloom, right? Engineering does this and natural resources does that and law and Haas, and they're all doing their own stuff. And then you put it on a single slide and it looks pretty crazy. And the question is, you know, you don't want to overly top down things at Berkeley. That gets spit out very, very quickly. But a little bit of coordination, a little bit of intentionality, that's kind of the sweet spot, that middle ground that I'm trying to occupy in my new role to help get this to whatever the next phase is going to look like. And 2 very quick concrete suggestions, and I'll stop talking and pass it over to Brian. Here's number 1. If you are a current undergraduate, or even if you're a recent alum and it's kind of like, actually, I would like to slice into this somehow, I would actually tell you, hey, take this slide, this today slide, and spend a day, like commit one day and say, I'm going to get to know as much about all of these things as I can. I'm going to try and figure out which of these are going to be the best connective tissue for me in terms of connecting to the university. I'm just going to spend some time learning about this stuff, because all of these icons actually have a story, and it would be worthwhile for people to understand, all right, which of the 5 that are going to be most valuable to me? How do I navigate this? I'm obviously available to help you navigate that, but put some time in, because people get, especially new students, they come in, they get so busy, they get buried, they're graduating, and they've experienced 5% of what's on this slide. So the idea is, let's get people sort of in the mix in a deeper way. That's concrete suggestion number 1. And again, I'm happy, we'll send these slides around, as I've said, but I'm happy to help people navigate. Like if people said, all right, if you'd recommended 1 thing or 3 things, what would they be? I'd be happy to do that. The second concrete suggestion would be if there are 2 things, especially for students, now I'm speaking a little bit more to the students and recent grads. If there are 2 things that I would start with, they are begin, and I'm trying to find where begin is even on this, but begin at Berkeley. There is a website. We created a website that is essentially an inventory of everything that's going on. It's meant to be the way that you navigate. So if you want to begin an entrepreneurial journey at Berkeley, go to this website, Begin at Berkeley, And that is a very good place to start. Naturally, the Begin at Berkeley website will point you in a lot of these different directions. So that's something I think each of you, if you're interested at all, I would go to that website for sure. And then the second thing is in this, the very first line, you see, 3/4 of the way across the first line there, it's STEP. STEP is a brand new program. And just very, very quickly, the idea is, what's the first step into entrepreneurship? It's like, oh, we got these incubators and these accelerators and all this stuff. It's sort of like, yeah, but you've already got teams formed. They've already got a business plan. They're already looking for funders. They're already looking for customers. That's pretty far down the funnel, actually. The step idea is, what's the first step? How do people that are kind of interested in this thing that they don't know that much about called entrepreneurship, how do those people mash up together and start thinking about companies and ideas and form it? So it's really those very first stages of company formation that STEP is aimed at. So that's actually a pretty interesting entry portal, and it didn't exist 3 or 4 years ago. It was student driven because the students knew they needed more than what we were providing on that first step front. So that was my intro comments. I'll turn it over to my friend and PB, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rich. I appreciate it. Matt and Rich, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. It's nice to be here. And I don't have anything formal prepared, so I don't want to disappoint anybody. I want to just kind of be geared to who the audience is and what everyone's questions are. Obviously, we're in exceptional times right now, and as that relates to entrepreneurship, I don't think there's a better time than a time of crisis like this. And the reasons for that are entrepreneurship, starting a new business is all based on filling a need, right? And so in the business I'm in, the software business, as well as just being an entrepreneur in general, change is a good thing because change is the catalyst for new needs, new ways to do things, innovation, right? So that's going on a lot right now, and it's time to rethink, reassess your career, reassess your endeavors if you are going down that entrepreneurial route right now. Obviously, you want to align it with the new reality of things, right? If you've got a business plan to sell things in a kiosk in malls, well, you better be rejiggering your business plan, right? So there's definitely new realities here. People are calling this pandemic the evolution accelerator. I think that's a really good term to use, right? Anything that is as a new need or a new trend is being accelerated tenfold by this pandemic. So there's going to be a lot of new needs out there, and ones that, just look at home delivery, right? Uber Eats and some of these other things that were just, treading water a year ago. Now, all of a sudden, they're accelerated and the need for them is emphasized. So I think it's a great time to be an entrepreneur and fill some of these new needs and these new trends that are happening. Along with that, there's a lot of financial assistance and financing options that are becoming available. There is a lot of liquidity out there. There's a lot of private equity. I'd say I get one call a week from a private equity firm who's just looking for somewhere to put their money. So I think even more so than the old, venture capitalist days, Sand Hill Road down in Palo Alto, it's even more abundant and more open-minded. Another huge boost to entrepreneurialism, right, it's happening right before our very eyes, is the acceptability of working from wherever you are. That used to be taboo, right? And you used to, lock the dog in the backyard when you were going to make a call, whatever. It's accepted now. it's not only accepted, in some cases it's being mandated. So that's no longer a hindrance. Not to say that you don't want to give an impression of being bigger than you are. I think that's a key aspect of being an entrepreneur. Is you always want to give the appearance of being professional and bigger, more established than you are, right? That's what everyone calls their consulting company, the consulting group, right? Even though there's only one guy. So you got those little tricks to the trade in doing that, and those are all legitimate. So I think right now is a good time to adjust, whether it be a career change or adjusting your approach to what you're doing, and look to all these other resources that one that Rich, I don't know if all those are available to only students or also to some of those may be available to alumni as well, I assume. Networking, obviously a very key thing, and one of the main benefits of us being in a fraternity, right? That's why we joined a fraternity in the first place, to learn from others, be motivated by others, learn from others, and especially, business connections for those who graduated. So you've seen my story basically on the bio. I was really fortunate while going to college in getting my internship with IBM. That was huge. And that enabled me to start basically a consulting company. Everything that I've done has been born out of necessity. And in that particular case, it was needed some cash, right? Going to college with no money. So I was able to take all of the information that IBM had on whoever had bought a new computer and new software, and they had no idea how to use it. And I tapped that database and made calls, and eventually, had a little consulting business that was running out of the Bro House. For Safeway, Rainbow Ice Cream, City of Alameda, just random. And that also was really kind of the genesis of the whole computer software solution era. When first coming onto the Cal campus, right, my sophomore year, they were just phasing out the card-based mainframe computers and just bringing in the minis and teaching programming languages. And I had taken one computer class before and did pretty well. So I was given the advice by my older brothers, two older brothers, and a father who had been in the job markets, obviously before me. And they all suggested getting a technical foundation first, as a degree, engineering or something technical, and not just be all business, because you can learn business later on. To get a technical degree later on is more difficult. So getting that foundation, I'd recommend to anyone, and students who are listening today, to not just be studying business. You'll learn more from just doing business than you will studying it in a book. So get some sort of technical base would be my advice before you venture out into actually selling a service or product. But I think, Rich, you hit two on the beginning step, right, for all of this, for the step organization, whatever, is deciding what it is, right? What product or service are you going to provide? What hole are you filling? You're going to be filling a need. That's step number one. And who needs it, right? Who's the target group for this thing? Doing that, realizing what you're good at. If you want to start a business, again, so many ways to do it, especially now. I wish I had everything that's available to us now 30 years ago. But in addition to those tools, consider getting a partner. You know, I didn't always have a partner. I have one now in my current software business. We've been together for 20 years. But look for somebody complementary to your skills. Obviously, no one's good at everything. So I think being able to acknowledge that, realize that, and teaming up with somebody who complements your skill set is going to go a long way in your business. Also, just running ideas by, proofing stuff that you've written, all that is you know, a critical, I think, component to successful business. If it's just you and you're the only one looking at everything, you think everything's great, right? So you need another pair of eyes, another mind doing it, if you can find that. So that's kind of, you know, my Reader's Digest version of, you know, how I became an entrepreneur, and the whys. And it's not for everybody. You have to be self-motivated. Number one, that's a given, right? That's pretty obvious. You can't be easily disappointed. You got to be, in general, a positive person, I think, because you're going to have lots of setbacks, and you have to be prepared to fail. If you're not failing, you're not trying. So that's got to fit into your personality. You got to be able to take day by day, put failures behind you, and look to the next day. If you need direction, you feel better in a more structured environment, then the corporate world, you know, is probably more for you, which isn't a bad thing, right? So entrepreneurship's a double-edged sword, right? It's great being your own boss, and it's great when you're making good money. But when it's not going great, you know, it's a mental burden, and it's kind of entrepreneurialism is a little bit of a disease in that it gets in your blood, and it's tough to get it out, tough to forget about it. So you're thinking about 24 hours, 24/7. You know, even when you go on vacation or whatever, you're pretty much, you and your job, you know, are pretty intertwined. I do try to keep something separate. You know, I try not to mix my business with when I do, you know, get to do things for pleasure. I do try to keep those things separate. So I do have, you know, some place to for some solace. I don't recommend doing business with family and friends. I know that might shock some people. Unless it's absolutely necessary financially or otherwise to get something started, I wouldn't recommend taking that risk, because that's what it is. It's a risk. When times are great, times are going good, doing business with your buddies is just like, you know, being at the grow house. Things are great. But it's when things are not going great that causes a problem and can kill relationships and grudges and those type of things. So if you don't have to do that, I would recommend not doing that.
Hey, I've got some questions.
People out there to sell to.
I've got some questions for you.
Great.
So I'm going to go down a list here. What is the hardest moment that you've had to deal with in your career, and how'd you get through it?
Oh my gosh. The hardest moments have been when you think you got something locked up, you got a customer you've been working on for a long time, and you don't get it, right? And even worse, you don't get it, in your mind, unfairly. You had a better product, they didn't pick your product, okay? And I've had a couple of those in my software business, where I've been selling to the largest bank, you know, in the country, with the best product, the best solution for what they need. But because of your size or because of politics or whatever, you know, you don't get chosen. That's a tough one. not much you can do about that. You can't dwell on what you can't control, and you'll drive yourself crazy trying to understand the internal machinations of a big corporation. You just can't. Just accept it. In my other business, in my CD Essentials business before, I was selling to the biggest retailer in the country with the potential, first order of, a couple $1 million of product. And I was in Bentonville, Arkansas, and literally on my way out there to sign the deal, they had just instituted some affirmative action programs there. So without getting into anything too political, but I was basically excluded from an arbitrary decision to go with a minority vendor, even though the product literally didn't work. So I'd say that was a pretty big disappointment. And so life's not fair, and the main thing you do is learn something from every disappointment or every failure, is take something away from it, take something positive, whether it be a lesson learned or retooling of your business model or a different approach at selling. That's,
Great.
that's the way I'd handle that situation.
So what at Berkeley or SAE instilled an entrepreneur spirit in you? Did Berkeley or SAE have anything to do with it, or was that all you?
I can tell you about every business I ran out of the Bro House, but Rich was an investor in one of my endeavors there. Berkeley was a great environment for independent thinking and getting wide exposure to life. It wasn't parochial. Even though we were all kind of similar in the fraternity, we all came from different backgrounds and all came from different perspectives. So getting that for one thing, is a good start. A holistic view of things. I mentioned the computer science area. At that time, I had focused on computer science. I went to USC the year before. That's when my brothers, my dad convinced me to go technical. Did well in my first computer science class there. So I picked out, I was either going to Stanford or Cal. I turned down Stanford and went to Cal. Had the #1 computer science department in the country over MIT, Harvard, and Stanford. So that was obviously a huge factor. Had some professors who are still in the Bay Area creating some of the things that you guys are using today around the house are invented by some of the professors we had there at Cal. So that was a huge factor. The Bay Area, a lot different than it is today. And Silicon Valley was kind of just making that transition to a computer-based area. So, not exposure to IBM, and then Hewlett-Packard was in the heart of Silicon Valley. I mean, Hewlett-Packard, they founded Silicon Valley after the Fairchild folks. But, those guys recruiting from the Cal campus and just getting exposed to, IBM, Bay Area, and so forth was huge. Another thing that, that comes out of being in a fraternity and being in a group of this is there's some competitiveness, maybe people don't talk about it maybe outwardly, but down below, I think everyone, kind of compares themselves to others, and you want to do well and you want to be able to talk shit, at duck dinner or whatever. And so it instills a little bit of competitiveness in you as well. And I was fortunate enough too to get the moral support of a few brothers who helped me with my very first business venture out of school, coming up with small, small potatoes compared to what we do now, but a huge deal back then for somebody to put up a few $1,000s to help you get something off the ground. So in a lot of ways, that background propelled me.
Great, great. A couple other questions here. Let's see. What kinds of changes, innovations have you made in your line of work as a response to the pandemic or to take advantage of the pandemic?
That's still for me, or are we on?
Yeah, that's for you.
Yeah. Chris Watson. Sit on the beach, get a beach cap, get a TV that works outdoors. No, I just think, again, like I talked about before, we were already, being a software company, we were already supporting and selling remotely. We were already having our employees, the ones who are good at it, working from home. By the way, not everybody's productive working at home, right? Matter of fact, I'd say a very low percentage of people are. So I think this thing about the new normal, about working from home, is a bunch of hooey. It's a good temporary period, again, for people to sort things out and reassess, and for companies to reassess and everything. But the new normal is not everyone working from home. But it is, like I mentioned, more acceptable. So as far as starting a new business or doing a few conference calls from home, it's not going to be as frowned upon, as it has been. I don't know. This whole thing is just so crazy. There's so many, so much speculation going on about the timing coming out of this and the permanent effects of all this. It's really just all speculation. But you can kind of compare it to other crises like 9/11, where, it was crazy coming out of that thing where you couldn't get on a plane with nail clippers, right? And a lot of that went by the wayside, but now you pretty much permanently, unless you're TSA, they're going through your bags from now till forever. That's a new reality, a lingering effect of the crisis. So no doubt there will be those coming out of this one. And there'll all be new needs, new opportunities. I mean, that's really kind of the way to look at this from an entrepreneurial standpoint is, I mean, you see, what are all the commercials you see on TV now? It's about desks and chairs and fixing up your home office. And it's actually made, my little phone doc product, right? Just doing conference calls from home. You just set your phone in there. So it's a whole new, the need for this product and for my software system where everything's done digitally from any place you're connected to the internet. The demand's grown tenfold for those kind of things. So that's what's affected me the most, coming out of this thing. Being an employer, I'm not only an entrepreneur, but I'm an employer. I've got 20 employees here in the software company. So it's introduced new personnel issues that you've had to deal with that you never had to before. And that's a really difficult one. Like deciding what your new policy is on being in the office. That is not an easy question to answer. And everything's so subjective to people's individual lives, whether, they come up, hey, Brian, I got to work from home now, and you got to be able to answer that. Yep. And answer it in a uniform way across, you can't just do it for one person, not for another. So you've got to update your policies and have concrete, answers and reasons for why someone can or can't.
Makes sense. So, what's the best advice you've received, and how, where has it been helpful?
I don't know. I haven't really reached out for a lot of advice, really, to be honest with you.
Can I try one on
Do
that
that.
real quickly, and then I'll pass it back. You know, so just well, here's one that I know Brian has thought about. So when I first became dean of the business school at Haas, and Haas has, like every school, it has an advisory board, and a lot of the advisory board members are CEOs and former CEOs, people with a hell of a lot more experience than I had. But I was in the seat for the business school. Anyways, one of those board members said to me at one point, leaders set culture.
Yep.
Nobody had ever said that to me before. Part of your job is setting culture, managing the culture, managing the behavioral norms and values and beliefs of this place. And it's what's part of what makes it successful. I'd never thought of one of my job descriptions as including that, right? And it was sort of like a wake-up call. It's like, friend, you need to think about this, figure this out. Anyways, I started doing a lot of reading on it and so forth. But that idea that, you're an entrepreneur, part of what you're setting is this feeling, this chemistry, the norms and values that define how people work in your company. And you have to be intentional about that, because you will have a culture, whether you like it or not. And the question is it going to drive your business towards success, or isn't it?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's a kind of a tough one for me, because I like balance in my life, right? And my country club is just a stone's throw from, I can see it here from my office, and my house is less than 2 miles away, and the beach is 1 mile away. And I've learned to work, like I said before, I'm working in my mind 24/7, whether I'm in the office or not. So it really doesn't matter where I am. But I can't ask my employees to be there, to give the extra effort, to do things that I'm not doing. I have to lead by example. So that's hard, right? Because I'm trying to kind of enjoy myself a little bit now after working my ass off for all this time, but I'm still trying to lead the company, and you can't ask somebody to do one thing and you do another. So
that makes a lot of sense. So the next one I'm going to bring up, and actually Rich has talked about this a little bit before, but so I've spent myself over 3 decades working with fraternities and sororities, the good and the bad stuff that's been going on in the country. And now with everything going on right now, I feel like it's a time that fraternities and sororities need to innovate a little bit more. First of all, recruitment's virtual right now. They're not doing in-person recruitment. And one of the things Rich has brought up is the idea of maybe the fraternity becoming a fraternity of innovation and entrepreneurship. Maybe doing more panels, maybe bringing in more alumni that can set and give advice to young members that are coming up with ideas, right from the chapter house. What is your thought about something like that?
Do you want me to weigh in first?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll start, because I think part of what made this house, for all of us, such a remarkable experience is that there were so many kind of different ways of seeing the world. I didn't know what engineering was when I was an undergrad, and so anyways, I think I don't want to take this idea too far. The idea is not, if you're not an entrepreneur, this isn't the house for you. That was never and I know you didn't intend to frame it that way, but the idea was, and it wasn't my idea, there were a lot of people thinking about it, is what if 30 or 40 or 50% of the house was sort of thinking, yeah, I'm going to start my own business, either in school or after school or whatever. It's not 100, it's not 90, but it's sort of like, no, we're going to lean into this. We want this to be a theme. And I think understood that way, that there's still lots of people who have never have any intention of going the startup route who could still find a place in the house, but that having a theme, a narrative, a storyline that people started to say, hey, you need some competitive separation out there. You do. You need some differentiation. And if you just say, well, it's a bunch of good guys, come join us, that was a winning hand, and it has been for a long time. But I think it stepping up the game with a little sharper narrative without pushing away the things that have made the house great seems to me a good direction.
Great. Brian, any comments?
That's an interesting concept. I've never really thought about that before, but I think that you could just, rather than labeling the whole house, right, establish some sort of council within the house kind of thing, and maybe just for the hell of it, adding a little moniker to, the SAE when you mention it, the house for future leaders, or business success, some sort of something to associate it with. The real reason why we're all at school, right, is to get ready for the rest of our lives. And you kind of bring up an interesting point in there. That's not a huge focus while you're there.
Absolutely.
A few guys going out before everyone else with their backpacks on, going out to study, but no one's talking about, hey, what are we going to do afterwards? What could help? Again, I think it's a different world than when we were going to school. I think there's a lot more opportunities and a lot more help, a lot more networking opportunities. So probably a lot better setting today to establish something like that versus when Rich and I were in the house.
And by the way, yeah, go ahead.
Let me just add something quick on that, because I totally agree with Brian on that this notion of the gig economy and so forth, right? It's sort of like we're all entrepreneurs now.
Right.
The idea that, I'm going to go work at Google for the rest of my life, it's sort of like, right. No, you're not. I mean, if you're not entrepreneurial at Google, you're not going to last at Google. You're not even going to get the offer at Google, right? It's sort of like, where in this economy do you go and work for 30 years? And not that, that was already starting to fade when we were in college, but there was still the idea that you could go to IBM and be at IBM for your life, right? And
no corporate loyalty anymore.
But it's really not there. And I think it's also, most of these corporations are basically saying, I need you to be entrepreneurial. I need you to see the white space around your job and fill it. If you don't think that's your job, then even the biggest companies are saying, we don't want you.
Yep. Surely don't wait around for your boss to give you a good idea. That's just not going to happen. Yeah. So yes, you can be entrepreneurial within the corporation as well.
Now, one of the things that we're going to do is beyond that is we're going to start looking at formalizing a little bit more some of the career mentoring and networking. So we're going to have a place right on the website where people can sign up. They can actually sign up for mentoring or a career shadow, have a 30-minute conversation with you, just more resources for the undergraduates to succeed in their careers and or innovation, entrepreneurship type things.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And, I think what should go hand in hand with that is also a program to teach these guys to start thinking about their long-term financial welfare.
Yeah.
To start thinking about retirement back then. I wish somebody got me down, right, and told me to put $5,000 in a stock. No one did, and that's related to the comments about no corporate loyalty anymore. If you've been working for Google, that the whole days of relying on a pension, right, and if you're just retirement being taken care of, those days are gone too. So you need to start thinking earlier and earlier about setting yourself up for retirement. So now they got these Robinhood apps for so 12-year-olds can start buying stock. The earlier the better. And that's part and parcel with your career, right?
Yeah.
That's what you have a career, and it's all set up with the same goal of retirement, of what your quality of life is going to be when you retire, hopefully, before 75 or 80 years old. So I think intertwining because that's why you're helping them with the academical side, right? Is it's all the same goal of financial. So they need to learn the financial tools and the academic tools.
Absolutely. Makes sense. Anybody else have any questions, or either of you two have any more comments? I've went through the list of questions. The goal is not to make this too long, and we'll record it and we'll share it with everybody so people
Matt,
who are on will see it.
if I could offer one more, Matt,
Yeah.
I want to go back to something that Brian said, another thing that I completely agree with, and it is this idea of, about change and the opportunity set that's changing. And there was a question about what kinds of changes have you made in your line of work. So let me give you an example that comes from my line of work. We, as I mentioned, the Skydeck accelerator, right? What makes accelerators valuable? The most valuable thing in any accelerator is the set of people, alums, who serve as advisors. And this is not like, oh, I'll be an advisor to Skydeck, put me on the list. No, it's sort of like if you're an official advisor to Skydeck, you got to give 3 workshops a year. You got to be the principal advisor to 3 teams. You got to boom, boom. It's like a job description. Okay, so that's a huge asset. When an institution like Skydeck has 100 people that are willing to do that, it's actually closer to 300. That's a huge asset. So here's the idea, though. When we did those workshops, it's like a concentrated hour. This person's an expert at this, and they're giving all the Skydeck teams a 1-hour lecture on this issue. We used to do those all in person. Now, of course, we're doing them remotely. Well, you do them remotely, you now have it captured. You've got a digital library of all these 1-hour workshops, of all these incredibly spiky topics. It's like, well, how do we provide access to that to a much wider group of people? How do we monetize that? You could do it just for reputation and say anybody doing a startup anywhere in the world that's fighting COVID-19, you get access to our digital workshop series. That would get global attention. Wouldn't generate revenue, it'd generate huge reputation. Or you could start to price it and monetize it that way. Anyways, it's a product line that didn't exist before. We were forced into it, and then you realize, my God, this is a gold mine. This is content. What are we going to do with it? Anyways, that's just one example of the kind of opportunity that flashes, and you start to realize, well, we never would have thought of this, but it's an opportunity.
Absolutely. Brian, anything else?
Not really. If anyone else had any other questions, I kind of mentioned everything I could think about.
I will share that if anybody emails me or Rich, both of us have his Cal document he shared today, so we can share it with anybody that wants it.
Yep.
I will, by tomorrow or the next day, we'll have the recording up on the site, on the website. And then maybe next week, sometime we'll send out an email with the recording.
I'd say my last words is go for it. You're thinking about doing something, you'll never freaking know if you don't do it, if you don't try it. Don't be afraid of failure. Go out. What's the worst that can happen? Right?
Absolutely.
So go do it.
Absolutely.
My final advice.
Rich, any last words, or then we'll sign off?
Right.
Well, that was a great one right there. I guess the one thing that I would offer is, we teach entrepreneurship totally differently than we did 10 years ago, even than we did 5 years ago. There's this whole lean startup methodology. If you haven't read about kind of lean, how do you go out there and, people say, don't spend 6 months writing a business plan. Get out of the goddamn building. Go talk to 5 people who are potential customers, and then come back and figure out what you learned, and then do that again, and do that 5 times before you ever sit down and write a business plan. Most businesses don't survive the first conversation with a potential customer. And this whole lean entrepreneurship methodology, I can point people to great articles in this area if you want to do more reading in this methodology.
Great. Thanks.
Well, I have one small question here. Brian, when you first started and you gave sort of your little, your background and whatnot, you said that like technical knowledge was really, really important. You can learn sort of business knowledge, subsidiary, like sort of secondary.
That's right.
But then, recently, Rich, you mentioned that like, having that entrepreneurial, that business mindset's really, really important going into that first job. So, where do you sort of Like, can you provide more clarity about what you mean by like having that entrepreneurial mindset versus having that like technical knowledge? I'm sort of at a loss here, at a crossroads.
That's for you, Rich.
Okay, well, look, I'm happy to take that one. You know, one of the things I like very much Brian's point about the technical background. So the two programs that I'm most excited about that we've launched, they happen to be on those slides. One is called MET, Management, Entrepreneurship, and Technology. It's a dual degree between engineering and business. So we mash them up together and it's like you're going to get both. I think there's incredible magic in both. Obviously, I'm a bit biased. I think business education is very helpful. But boy, when it's coupled with depth, right, the so-called T-shape, right, you got some depth, technical depth, and, you know, a little something about business that becomes super useful. So, you know, the pairing is incredibly valuable. I also feel like, you know, there's a world of entrepreneurship that isn't necessarily science or technology based. I mean, at Cal, Brian was the only one I remember in the house who had his own goddamn PC from the get-go. I didn't know what a PC was. I mean, I know this sounds strange to all of you, but it's sort of like he had a IBM PC in his room. It's like, what the hell? So he was getting it earlier than the rest of us. And he made technology and science-based entrepreneurship a great gift in his life. But, you know, it's not necessarily true that to be an entrepreneur, you need to do it in a science or technology-based area. And that's where I think there are a lot of people that go to business school that become entrepreneurs. They at least know how to ask intelligent questions of the scientists that they need to employ, but they can run with that ball more widely. It really kind of depends upon the domain, in my view, the domain that you want to be entrepreneurial in.
Yeah. I think just you hit the nail on the head. Is to have some depth. Maybe it doesn't have to be a technical degree, but an advanced knowledge of something other than business, right? So that you can add the business layer on top of that. There's tons of people around, just something to distinguish yourself or give you a one up on the guy next to you that the boss is deciding between. You know, who's got more depth to their knowledge? I think that word is the operative word.
Great.
That's a good question.
Yep.
Let's see. One
One
more question just came in. Can you talk a little bit about the need to keep learning new things after you leave school?
Is that from Chuck? I know Chuck's learning all the time. You know, that was on my list too, of you never stop learning. I mean, that is just so key. Again, most you're going to learn when you're out there in the business world and you're taking some shots at stuff, you're going to learn the hard way, and learn from others and stuff. But never stop learning. Always be educating yourself. That's key. I've got guys working for me that are 65 plus, and I'm still sending them to classes and, you know, send them up to Apple to learn how to use their computer or whatever it is. My mother is 90 years old this month, and she's still taking computer classes. I mean, and learning new things, how to use the new technology all the time. So there's never an end to that.
So what question just came in? What's better, MET or SCET?
Well, MET is this dual degree program, Management, Entrepreneurship, and Technology. SCET is Sutarja's Center for Entrepreneurship and Technology, which is, strictly speaking, not a degree program. It lives within engineering, but it's also connected very much to Haas. So I think of SCET as a wider network of programs. MET is very specifically a dual degree program. So they really complement each other. If I could just one quick comment, because I know we have to leave now, but this is connects to what Brian just said. So, you know, I think one of the things that Berkeley's really good at, especially when you are competing with that person from an elite private school, and we all do, when you are really open to learning, think of it as an intellectual humility. I actually hear from leaders in businesses is like, we just hired that 22-year-old and she is walking around thinking they've learned all they need to learn. Right? No, humility, part of actually learning your whole goddamn life is knowing you don't know it all yet. And people make this mistake in business all the time. So we call it at Berkeley these days, confidence without attitude. That phrase is not just humility. It starts with the C word. Confidence matters. Bring it. Bring it. We want strivers, but it doesn't have to come with arrogance. Now, people can disagree about what great leadership is, and there are a lot of quote unquote great leaders out there who are not well described by confidence without attitude. But if you think that's a good leadership style, and I sure as hell do, and I think it fits well with Berkeley, that is part and parcel of sort of learning the whole time, because you just don't know it all yet.
Right. A good example of that is I started a new marketing plan for the next year here at North Shore Systems, right? And the whole marketing plan had to do with getting awareness out there, building the website, doing targeted emails, all that kind of stuff. And I realized I don't know how to do all this shit. So I ended up hiring a 21-year-old gal who never puts her phone down because she can do everything from this little device. And no, farewell, she knows a hell of a lot more than I do about getting the word out about a company or a product, even though she's 40 something years younger than me. So good point. Acknowledge.
Well, yeah. Welcome to our new world. Well, everybody, so we're at the hour. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then I promise we'll get something out by next week. Thanks for both of you who led the discussion today, and we'll start planning our next one for next month. So we'll keep doing at least one of these a month.
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining.
Everybody.